Are you struggling on your way to $5 million in revenue in your home service company? Hey, what's up, blue collar business owner? Welcome back to the Blue Collar Prosperity Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Maskill, where I focus on helping guide you to have a business that produces consistent, positive cash flow. In doing so, you'll have clarity and confidence that your business is headed in the right direction. Today is a solo show. It is the first Monday of the month. What we are going to dive into today is getting stuck on your journey to $5 million. So this is where I see so many businesses get stuck, and it's totally avoidable if we have the right plan in place. As a CFO for trade businesses, my job is to make sure you have exactly what you need, know exactly what you need to do, what levers to pull to achieve your definition of success, freedom, and wealth. And that's what I focus on every day. What I didn't realize is for the longest time, I was the fractional CFO for all the companies I've owned. I've scaled and sold 4 different companies, and I just never knew it. So I just assumed most business owners knew their numbers and they knew how to map out their plan. And eventually I realized that's not the case. Most people don't start their businesses because they love numbers. They start their businesses because they're great at the trade. They love the trade. They can teach other people to trade, but they get stuck in growing their business. So that's what we want to focus on today. Is most business owners in the trades and really anywhere started their business because they had this dream, this vision, this goal. And a lot of times in order to achieve that vision and that goal and what success looks like, it requires to have a business that can run without us. And in order to do that, usually we got to get into like the $5 million range to really start putting all the people in place. So where we really get stuck is going from, say, 1 million to 5 million. In my opinion, most businesses can get to $1 million in revenue just by brute force. They can push a rock up the hill. They can work 60 hours. Then they can go to 70 hours. Maybe they hire a helper. They might have one person, answering the phone and doing all the things in the office. And maybe they have one other person out in the field that they trust. But everyone's wearing multiple hats. So in order to go from 1 million to 5 million, we really have to start putting people in place that manage other people, that lead other people other than yourself. You're going to need a service manager. You might need an install manager. You're probably going to need some help in the office. You're probably going to split the CSR and dispatch role. You're going to have all these different roles, and you're going to have other people that you just don't have the bandwidth to oversee everybody. There's going to be too many technicians, too many people in the office. So how do we actually do that? And how do we decide when do we need to hire? And that's the first thing I want to focus on today, is because where it doesn't make sense from a numbers standpoint is when we bring somebody new, brand new into the office, especially, they're not going to be at 100% capacity right away. What do I mean by that? If you have somebody that's, doing the CSR role, and then you need to hire a second CSR role, that means your current CSR, maybe they're overworked, maybe they're at 120%, 130%, and they're grinding it out. But then when you bring on that second person, now you're going to be at like 60% each, or 60 and 70, or 65 and 75. So how do we bridge that gap from where we're at to all of a sudden bringing on somebody new, paying them $40,000-$50,000, how do we determine how long does it take in order for them to pay for themselves? So it's the same in any other role. So if you're looking to split the CSR and dispatch role into have a dedicated dispatcher and a dedicated CSR, or all of a sudden you need a warehouse manager because you can't handle it anymore, or your service manager can't handle it anymore. So how do we determine when to spend that money? And the same thing can be said for assets too in your business. If you're determining to buy a piece of equipment that you're tired of renting, when do we pull the trigger on that? So let's just kind of start mapping it out. That's the first thing I like to focus on, is really just the black and white, the dates, the numbers, etc. So it all comes down to cash flow, and that's what I help people with on a daily basis. So looking at the cash flow of bringing on, somebody else, when do we hire that person? And then when do we start offloading things from our plate as well? So we're wearing multiple hats. How do we know that all of a sudden I don't have to be the service manager anymore and I can go hire a service manager? And when can we afford that person? So the way I like to look at it is really just map it out month by month. So I'm going to give you some very basic margins that we should be hitting in our service-based business, especially if you're in 100% service. If you're doing some construction, some service, these numbers could be a little bit different. But We want our gross profit to be between 50 and 60%. And you've probably heard me talk about this before. You've heard other people talk about this before, and you might not know what that means. So the easiest way to define how to get to gross profit without getting into the weeds is we have our revenue and then we minus our field labor and all of the materials out in the field. So labor and material are our two biggest costs of goods sold is what it's called. So revenue minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit. So when you look at your books and you see cost of goods sold, you need to have all of your field labor in there. You need to have all of your materials in there, any permits in there, and miscellaneous things as well as far as delivering services in the field. Sometimes myself, I like to include all the fuel for our vehicles because we're only using that if we're running jobs. I like to include the maintenance for the vehicle for the same reason. But anyway, that's how we get to gross profit. Revenue minus labor and material gets us to gross profit. Ideally, in a great, phenomenal world, we get it to 60%, but most companies that I talk to, they're not even at 50% yet. So let's call it 50%. So we've got 50% left to pay basically all of our other expenses. The main three categories there are our marketing, our office payroll, and then our overhead. So those are the main three categories. If you look at your P&L, there's a whole bunch of categories, but I like to simplify it for business owners in that way, just so we know exactly where we're at. So we can start with marketing. I would say on average, most companies I see, they're spending between 8 to 12%. So we're going to call it 10% for math's sake. So 50%, we have 50% left over. Now we minus 10% for marketing. That puts us down to 40% left. And we want our net profit to be between 15 and 20%. As we scale, we want it to be probably 20 to 25, but let's just go low end 15 to 20%. So that means we have 20 to 25% left over for office payroll. So everybody in the office, including the owner, and overhead. So that's your rent, that's your utilities, and any other overhead, obviously, that you have in your business. So when we're growing, when we're hiring somebody, we're moving into a new building and our overhead's going to go up. We have to figure out how long can we afford to take that hit into the margins we just talked about. So we know that our cost of goods sold is 50%, so our gross profit's 50%. We know our marketing is always going to stay kind of in the same way, but if you have the question of when can I ramp up for marketing and how long do I have until I need to pay that back per se, you can also do with that. But for example's sake, we're going to say that we want to hire a service manager, and that service manager is going to cost us, I don't know, $100,000. So we've got 50% left over. We've got 10% going to our marketing. So now we got 40%. And say, just for example's sake, right now our overhead and our office payroll is 25%, and we're at 15% net profit. So when you go hire that service manager, your net profit will dip short term until you can produce more revenue. So when you start mapping this out on a monthly basis, now you're going to see, okay, we're paying this person $8,000 a month. How long can we do that? Or how long, do we have to do that before we need to have the revenue match up with that, so that way our margins get back in line? And that's the easiest way to do it. So that's the first step. So let's say we determine, and you got to map this out month to month. If you don't want to do it, hire a CFO. That's my opinion. That's what I do for people. But you can totally do this manually. You just map it out, use Excel, use paper, use a whiteboard, whatever it is. But you might determine that, hey, that service manager is going to allow our service technicians to have higher average tickets, higher close rates, because they're going to be doing training every day. They're going to be doing, weekly meetings, and they're going to be doing all these other things. And you're going to be able to hire more people because they can oversee more people, which will allow you to then go do other things. And this example is assuming you're still the service manager. So we figured that out. Now, this is where kind of the rubber meets the road. We have to set these people up for success. If we are hiring a service manager for the first time, or we're hiring a dispatcher for the first time, where before, our person in the office just kind of handled everything. They did dispatching because there was only, 3 or 4 technicians, and they're answering the phone and they're checking the mail and they're doing onboarding and they're doing all these things, but eventually they can't. So this is where we need to start setting these people up for success. So that way, once we get them there, it's not a revolving door. That person didn't work out. That person didn't work out. That person didn't work out. So what do I mean by that? First, we have to have standard operating procedures for this role. We have to have it documented. How can you be successful in this role? So If it's a service manager, it's mapping all of the things out that they need to do and what do they need to hit in order to be successful. So, what do their technicians need to do in the field? What do they need to do to support them? And everything that goes along with that. So, that's the first step. We have to have all the bits and pieces documented. We can always improve them, but the key is just document them the first time. So, getting our standard operating procedures documented. Then we have to have training in place. So, we have to put this training in place so that way we are continually getting better, because when you bring this person in this role, they're not going to go from, 0 to 60 right away. They're going to need training, and they're going to need continual training. If you look at the best teams in sports, I like to use sports as an analogy for business a lot because it's very similar. Those teams train and practice every day. So we've got the SOPs in place. Then we've got the training in place. Now we got to put the onboarding in place. When we start this person day one, what does day one look like? And it's not just go read a bunch of things and sign a bunch of documents and watch a bunch of videos. We got to make day one awesome. So we got to make onboarding great. We got to make the training great. Now they're up and running. They're doing their thing. Now we need accountability. We need to be checking in with them regularly. We need to have accountability in place. Whatever that means for you. Could be weekly, weekly one-on-ones, monthly sit-downs, quarterly reviews. That's kind of the cadence I like to use. But whatever it is, we need to have accountability set up so that they know when they're off track, they know when they're on track, and then they also know what to do when they're off track. And how do we do that? So the next thing with that is scorecards. Every role in your company needs a scorecard. They need to know, how do we measure success in this company? All the things I just mentioned, SOPs, training, onboarding, accountability, scorecards. This is where most people fail. They don't take the time to build these, and they just go hire somebody and say, here you go, figure it out. I'll sit with you for a little bit. Before you know it, you're putting out fires. They're not successful. We blame them. We get rid of them, and it's a revolving door, and we just keep hiring and firing, hiring and firing. Take the time to build the foundation to do it right. Standard operating procedures, training, onboarding, accountability, scorecards. It's not rocket science. You just have to do it. Once you do it, then you can improve it. So that's what that looks like. The last thing I would encourage everybody to look at, no matter the role in the company, is what kind of performance pay can we implement for this role? How can we incentivize them that the better they do, the more money they make, and the more money they make, we should be making more money as well. So that's what we want to put in place: the SOPs, the training, the onboarding, the accountability, the scorecards, and the performance pay. That's where 98% of the companies I work with, I talk with, they've been stuck before, and that's why they can never get to the $5 million mark. They think it's because of something else. Nobody wants to work, can't find good people, can't get enough leads, da 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 da. And it's really, truly, simply, you have not built a solid foundation in order to scale. Just like in building a home or building a building, we need the foundation before we do anything else. So that's it, guys. That's what I want you to focus on, getting to 5 million. This is where most people get stuck, is they don't know when to hire. Then when they figure out when to hire and they figure out where the math makes sense, they don't do it properly because they're not setting their people up for success. Last thing, this is a bonus thing for anybody that follows EOS. This is where I get frustrated more than anything. Is here's the thing. If you're familiar with EOS, keep listening. If you're not, I would encourage you to read the book Traction by Gino Wickman. It's a great book. It'll allow you to help set up your organization for success. But this is where I see a lot of founders just kind of fall off the wagon and nothing ever gets done. Is in EOS, there are two different types of people that lead organizations, and you need both of them according to EOS. There's a visionary and there's an integrator. The visionary is more like the CEO. They've got this vision, they got these ideas, but they're not really good at implementing. Whereas the integrator is probably more of the COO. They're more of the operations person. They're taking what the CEO says, probably pulling on the reins a little bit, and then actually implementing all the things. However, most companies that do this, they fail, and they fail miserably. The reason they fail miserably is because when they claim themselves to be a visionary, they're like hands off. They just say, our integrator, go figure it all out. And there is no accountability. The problem with that is usually the integrator is just an employee and the visionary is the owner, the founder, the person with all the skin in the game. However, EOS has convinced them that they don't need to do anything else other than hire an integrator. So EOS is great. It's a great thing to aspire to, but it has to be done properly. Now, the key to all this is take your time. I see way too many people rush into all these things, and then it costs them years and years and years. Whereas if you do it right the first time, if you take the time to plan, you take the time to prepare, you will be way, way, way more successful. So, in a recap, when do we need to hire? Well, first, we have to determine out what role do we need to do next. Buy Back Your Time is actually a great book to figure that out. I didn't even mention that, but it really kind of walks you through what things are the best to take off your plate. So once we know what role we're going to hire, and then we've got to do the math to figure out when to hire this person and how much runway do we have from a cash flow standpoint in order to afford this person before it really starts hurting the business because the revenue isn't matching the new expenses with the company. Once we map out how long it takes, we've got to build a solid foundation. SOPs, training, onboarding, accountability, scorecards, reviews, performance pay, all those things. And then lastly, if you are running EOS, if you are the visionary, doesn't mean you don't have to do anything going forward and you just give it all to the integrator. So that's all I got, gang. The key to all this is to get started. Get started today. One of my favorite quotes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. If you need help with any of this, go to thebluecollaradvisors.com. Go there. You have two options. You can book a free call with me. We'll dive into your business, figure out what's working, what's not working, and give you a recipe for success. I'll also do a financial assessment to tell you what's working, what's not working in your business. And there is a bonus download there as well. You can tackle the number one problem that I see with business when it comes to financials, and that's being priced properly. There is a free pricing calculator, which also comes with a step-by-step guide and a video walkthrough. So go to thebluecollaradvisors.com and reach out today if you need help. Just get started. The first step is to know exactly what you want, what your definition of success is, then start putting in the work. Have a great day, y'all.